You mentioned jihad. Well, let's go back to some terms and describing them. We hear it used here, and we hear people in the streets of Australia glorifying the idea of jihad. Now, I've heard some Muslims say this refers to the internal spiritual struggle to be holy, which is something Christians and Muslims would, at least in the broad, identify with. But others see it as a violent waging of war against non-Muslims. How do we understand jihad?
If you pick up a collection of hadiths, these are traditions of Muhammad, there are a number of books of covering different topics, a book on marriage, a book on this and that. There'll be a book on warfare. And the book on warfare is always called the Book of Jihad. In Islamic jurisprudence, jihad as a technical term refers to warfare against unbelievers to advance the cause of Islam. That's an age-old fact. It's reality. The problem for Islam in the world, in the modern world today, is that to have a faith that regards fighting as a fundamental precept of the religion is obviously hugely problematic. It makes your position insecure. It makes you a threat. It's difficult. And there's the cognitive dissonance of how to live in the world with that. So one of the responses to that is to say, oh no, jihad is not that. And so people use a hadith which says that jihad is this personal internal struggle, but actually that tradition has never been accepted as reliable by Muslim scholars. And in any Islamic textbook, the chapter on jihad is about taking captives and killing and how to fight. So it's a misrepresentation of Islam, I think. Hamas is not under the illusion that jihad is just an internal personal struggle. It understands only too well that it's a battle against infidels. So this is a great deception. It's like the term religion of peace. That was just never used of Islam until the 20th century. It's the result of Islam having to exist in modern conditions that an apologetic needs to be put forward to say that Islam is peaceful, tolerant, and doesn't have violence. But many Muslims have spoken out against this trend, leading Muslim scholars. So it's just not credible, but it's sort of forced upon Muslims trying to exist in the modern world.
Yeah, and again, it's undergirded by a wider theology. It's not just the word, but if Islam is law to be enforced, then traditionally Islam says you can use all the apparatus of government to enforce it. You can use the police to enforce it. You can use the army to enforce it.
Correct.
You can use force legitimately. The only debate in the Muslim communities, it's not a debate about whether you can use force or not. The only debate is what's the appropriate place to use force, or what's the appropriate force to use in this context. So, yeah, there's never been any dispute that jihad has been a battle in a genuine militaristic sense. Absolutely.
Can I tell you a story about this? That when the civil war broke out between East and West Pakistan, it created a theological dilemma because, strictly speaking, in Islam, you should only fight against infidels. It's forbidden for Muslims to fight against Muslims, and warfare should be for Islam. So what happened was the West Pakistani theologians declared that the East Pakistanis were infidels. And so it became a holy war. And then you can kill the infidels and rape them as well. And hundreds of thousands of women in East Pakistan, now Bangladesh, were raped. It was very traumatic. But it's an example of the dilemma of a nation that wants to go to war and has this religious demand that war should be to advance Islam. And that created huge trauma for the Bangladeshis. It was a tragic episode, but an example of how the power of Islam to shape national consciousness and awareness around violence.